Hello and welcome to the Extremis Publishing Podcast. I'm Tom Christie, and I'm delighted to be joined today by one of our favourite guests to the podcast and making a very welcome return to talk about his brand new book. It's Mr. Robert Murray. His new book is called My Life in Carnoustie, A Long Time Ago, and it's a very warm and informative discussion of the town that he's called home for many decades, discussing all of the things that have made this amazing seaside town so unique. So, Robbie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here chatting with you.
So what can you tell us about your new book? What was the genesis of the project, and what about it has made it such a special project for you?
Well, Tom, I've been thinking about this, that I grew up in Carnoustie, born at Barry, a little village next door to Carnoustie, did my schooling in Carnoustie, started my employment, and of course scouts and church and everything else that happened to be in the town. But then I left the town and I was gone for decades. And having returned, I feel the warmth of the place. I feel the warmth of what I had as my hometown, if that's the phrase. And it made me think of all the good things that Carnoustie had done for me. And being involved more recently with a heritage group where we invite speakers to come and talk about the history of the town, I began to think of my own existence, to put it that way. It stirred in my thoughts the whole idea of what I had grown up with, the values and the quality of life I had in a wee place called Carnoustie. And I thought it must be time to put something down in print about this. Of course, I'd read several booklets about Carnoustie's history, but nothing about an individual person's life and growing up in Carnoustie. So I thought to myself, perhaps I should be doing something about that. So I hasten to say there's nothing unique or special about my life, but what I've tried to do is just to outline all the parts of my life growing up in Carnoustie. And so it's my life in Carnoustie.
So you've seen many changes to the town in that period, and it's a remarkable place. I mean, as communities go, it's the fourth largest settlement in the county of Angus. It's a place that has a very rich heritage. What do you think have been the predominant changes that you've seen in your lifetime to Carnoustie?
Good question, Tom. I've thought about this. And a friend of mine, quite not unkindly, said a few years ago, of course Carnoustie had its immigrant problem. And I said, problem? And immigrant, what do you mean, Alan? And he said, well, the immigrants. And I thought, what do you mean? He said, of course, all the people that came from the central belt, and particularly the west coast, Glasgow area, come to Carnoustie. And I thought, yes, he's right. I'd never, ever thought about calling them immigrants. But I realise now, when I stop to analyse Carnoustie as it is today, there's a huge welcoming factor and a huge input in what the so-called immigrants have brought to the town. And more recently, I went along to collect a cheque for our heritage group, and where other groups and small parts of the town, clubs, societies, each of them gone along to collect a cheque from a charity shop to help them with the funding. And I was absolutely staggered by the number of groups and societies in the town, ranging from the smallest little groups of dancing for children to historic heritage groups and football clubs, guides and cubs and scouts and so on. It just amazed me. The room was filled, and I thought to myself, this would not have happened in my time. All of this has come about by the input by people coming to live in Carnoustie. So Carnoustie physically as a town has grown from my day is probably 4,000 population to something like 3 times that now. And it's a growing town. But the heartening thing about all of this is these clubs and societies are still a very strong fabric weaving in the town. And so my part in this wasn't to set out just the most recent Carnoustie. I thought I really need to put on record what Carnoustie was like for me, because I don't find books or items anywhere about anybody growing up in Carnoustie. Yes, I've read some historic facts and pieces of detailed research that's been written about Carnoustie, but not the everyday life of someone in the town. So it strikes me from a heritage point of view, it's like the writings of the Picts or the Egyptians or whatever. I feel there needs to be a bit more flesh in the stories of what people leave behind. So it's not just a photograph of a building or a photograph of a person, but I thought it needs to be fleshed out. What was life like in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, etc. So it wasn't a serious academic project, Tom. It was just me in my old-fashioned way trying to realise that there's a story to tell here. And because I don't read, when I see some of these items, I don't get an impression of what life was like for a person living 100 years ago in Carnoustie, or 70 or 80 or 200 years ago in Carnoustie. So it was a way of me trying to normalise history in a social way, to tell what life was really, the nuts and bolts of living in Carnoustie, basically.
And you do chart a number of changing industries. I mean, you talk about the fishing industry, you talk about the thriving high street and how that has evolved over the decades, and of course you talk about your own experiences working in the commercial sector, and how things have changed between the 1950s and now. Do you think that there's any sort of particular lessons that we can learn from these developments?
Well, yes, Tom, there's a strand that runs through all of this, of course. Like the villages, West Haven, East Haven, but particularly parts of Carnoustie as well, it was farming, it was fishing. Basically, that was it. And from that early days, the farming world, of course, continues unchanged practically. Well, unchanged in its extent of the farming activity, but a huge change in the methods they use now to farm. Fishing has died, where we now have amateur fishers or people who go out and catch crabs and nets and creels. But I think the Industrial Revolution touched Carnoustie in a mild way. Well, I say mild, yes, mild in the bigger scheme of things, industrialisation. But in Carnoustie's case, in the context of Carnoustie, changed it quite a bit. We had a foundry in Carnoustie going back to the 1890s, and by, strangely enough, we were building a Carnoustie car in 1906 called the Dalhousie car. There was a factory, there was a foundry, and that was one of the, it wasn't a main product, but it was a byproduct. We then had a jute works in Carnoustie. And that, of course, was dealing with the flax that was being grown all around the country and the county. We had a shoe factory in Carnoustie. So there were numerous elements of industrialisation on a minor scale, but in the context of Carnoustie, quite a sizable scale. I think there were people with the capital to spend in setting up businesses. Some of them came from Dundee. But I think largely they found a population here on their doorstep with a working capacity to fill jobs. And I think that it was quite rich pickings to bring a business to Carnoustie and have the labour here to support these businesses. That made a big difference. Of course, it ended up with the town having what you would call an industrial or commercial end to it, and an end which was largely purely residential. When the railway line was laid, the Dundee Arbroath railway line was laid in 1838, and the railway station was set up, it immediately changed the whole context of Carnoustie as a town. Prior to 1838, the Carnoustie, basically the eastern boundary of Carnoustie, ended at what we call the Lochty Burn, whereas as soon as the station was set up, new buildings, substantial stone-built villas and terraces were built up at the east end of the town, where people had ready access to the railway station. So there is a split town element to it. Some people locally might call it the working end and the posh end. So there's a few jokes going on about the working end and the posh end of the town. Happily for me, I grew up at one time in my early days at what would be the posh end, but I was on the correct side of the railway. I then moved to what would be the working end of the town, and here I am today, residing in what was called the posh end of the town. These are not divisory things. These are just local comments of a humorous nature, but it signifies the unique blend that Carnoustie was able to offer. It offered jobs for a working population that was there, ready on hand, and it offered buildings for people who wanted to come and reside in what for then was a healthy place to be, away from the smoke and grime of a city like Dundee.
Well, you mentioned the great importance of the railway to Carnoustie, but wasn't it also true that at one point there was even discussions about the Dundee tram services reaching Carnoustie?
Absolutely, yes. There's two things that stick in my mind from what I've picked up on. One was there was an immediate call from the local borough council to establish a railway platform station at the west end of Carnoustie, in addition to the one that was the prime building in the first place. So there was an awareness that there was a market for an earlier platform at the west end of the town. And likewise, a delegation from the Carnoustie Borough Council made its way to Dundee to speak with the people who were running the trams. And yes, there was a plan to have trams all the way from Dundee initially to Moneyfeith. That didn't happen either. But beyond that, Carnoustie, the far-sighted powers that be in the Borough Council were switched on enough to look for a tram all the way to Carnoustie, which would have been quite easily done given the level surface of the playing field, as they say.
Now, one thing I'm sure that will jump out at readers of your book is the amazing range of original photographs that you have, some of them stemming all the way back to the 1920s. Why were you so fortunate to have such a long-lasting photographic record of your family and of Carnoustie more generally?
It must be luck, Tom. First of all, I think I was looked after in a wonderful family. Not my immediate mum and dad, but my gran and granddad and both sides of my family. Extremely fortunate in my heritage there, both in the way that these people lived and worked and toiled and the lives they had, and they cared about things, and they cared about their families, and they had obviously taken great steps in the earliest possible days when photographs were able to be taken. First of all, the technology was there. They were pretty smart, I think, in those days. So my mum's boxes in my loft of boxes and photographs, etc., are all there for me to find. So it wasn't a difficult task to find documents, photographs, certificates, all sorts of manner of things that had been carefully stored by my mum and dad. I don't think they would keep that for any particular heritage reason. They just happened to be there, luckily for me.
So I think it would be remiss when discussing Carnoustie not to talk about the golf course and of course the fact that it is one of the top golfing destinations for the whole of the country. How much do you think golf has played a part in the life of Carnoustie, and in what kind of different ways?
Well, first of all, it was a very early start for golf in Carnoustie. There were people, the Earls of Dalhousie were playing golf allegedly in the 16th century on what was then the links, which would be rough ground with marram grass and gorse bushes and whatever, probably with nothing much in the way of mechanisation to produce putting greens in the standard we know today. But evidently, yes, that was a part-time favourite sport from people from all these, I dare say, at a certain level of people who had the wherewithal to manufacture or buy golf clubs such as they were in those days, and even to find a thing called a golf ball. But it gradually developed over the years where it grew, and the golf course became a very treasured part of the borough of Carnoustie. The borough had its own responsibility to look after golf. It grew, and the rules of caddying. In fact, there was a representative from each golf club on the Carnoustie Borough Council, or vice versa. There was a representative from the Borough Council on a golf club committee. So golf clubs developed for ladies eventually and for gentlemen. So there was a buzz of golf from very early days, probably in the 19th century certainly, and steadily growing from then. Of course, the golf clubs, largely half of them have disappeared now. The control of the golf course was taken over by the Angus Council, and so there were various changes administratively about golf. But of course it has reached the high peak when it has introduced and has been on the circuit of the Open, which is a big draw to bring people to the town. So Carnoustie's on the list of still being able to offer Open championships. They come through to Carnoustie all too seldom, but of course the course has gained historically by some of the biggest names in golf and their pursuits of golf on the famous golf links here at Carnoustie. So there's a lot of history already, and even today's players, the top players in the world, want to come here and conquer the Carnoustie course and get their names on the trophy.
Now, one of the things that you talk about, with great fondness in your book, is of course the sheer range of leisure time activities that you enjoyed with your family as you grew up. And I think it's probably important to mention that Carnoustie, even today, remains a very popular destination for outdoor activities and for family holidays. What is it, do you think, about the town that has made it such a popular destination for people?
I think the establishment of clubs and societies must go back to very early days. I talked earlier about the industrialisation, but if you consider, there were hundreds of people working in either the factory or the foundry or the shoe factory here in Carnoustie. Without doubt, these workers would find themselves bonding together at work. They would find themselves having the favourite pub to get to. They would then find themselves favourite things to do. Some of them would pick up golf, and that was a very important part of life. But as time went on, I think the introduction of nationwide organisations like Guides and Scouts and Cubs, all of these were present here in Carnoustie. I think also, apart from the industrial or commercial element that helped to sustain these activities, I think I'd have to say the churches as well would have a part to play. In my own case, it seemed it was normal for me, and I thought it was normal for everybody, but it wasn't necessarily so. But as a little Sunday school pupil, then a Sunday school pupil, then a Bible class, and then a youth fellowship pupil, these were the strands that we went through with the church. And so groups and meetings like that seemed to be commonplace. And I think there was just I think that background, engendered in the parents a need to try and help to develop little clubs and societies for Carnoustie. It just needs one very keen specialist in anything, be it photography or model aeroplanes or whatever, to try and find like-minded people to create a club or a society. And I think the good thing about Carnoustie was it wasn't massive and it wasn't tiny. It was just of a sufficient size where people in the town would have a connection of I know somebody who could help you there, or I know somebody who would like to be interested in this or that. And I think being the size as it was an easily contactable way of meeting people and getting people together to form groups. That's just my own theories, Tom. But I think the size of the town, the involvement of churches, the involvement with sufficient numbers of people working together and socialising together, all of that, I think, was probably the fabric that created the quite an impressive list of activities.
Well, one thing that your book does mention, of course, is the range of challenges that has faced Carnoustie in recent years, among them, of course, being the coronavirus pandemic. And you talk a little bit about how these challenges, which of course have impacted on the whole country, have faced Carnoustie specifically. And of course you also talk about the ways in which the community has survived these challenges and have gone on now to develop and to evolve. So what do you think the future holds for Carnoustie? What do you think the next 5, 10, 15 years will bring to the community? And what kind of changes do you think we might see?
Yes. I suppose, first of all, Tom, there's definitely a growth in the population that we've seen. There was a surge in the 1970s. There's been some lulls thereafter, but more recently there's been a greater increase in new housing developments, particularly at the west end of the town. I should say, by the way, that sometimes when we talked about the west end of cities, it was usually the posh end before, so that the wind would blow the smoke and grime dust to the east end of the town. But in a strange way, that didn't happen in Carnoustie. Carnoustie's business end of the town was the west end. But so I think population, if it continues to grow, will see Carnoustie thriving. I think there's no reason to doubt that the musical society, the drama group, the various Cubs, Scouts, etc., should continue or should not continue. I think all that would continue. One of the striking things that we know all about these days is the predominance of online shopping. I think we may find that it'll still be a struggle to keep shops functioning in the town. Even as I speak today, there are a few gaps in otherwise businesses that thrived for years without any problems. So I think that could possibly still be a problem. The population increase is going to help. I think to some extent there's a mixed feeling about, in my own view, about the churches. I think it's a nationwide problem where the ageing population of attendees at churches is going to have an impact. In my own case, we can see that happening where we've got Panbride and Newton Panbride churches already. We've lost one of these two churches. The same thing has happened at Barry. I don't really know how serious that impact will continue to be. Sadly, generally speaking, I think across the country, the ageing population of people attending church is diminishing, and I'm not quite sure to what extent that would have an impact on the loss of some clubs and societies, because there's no doubt about it, the churches were a very fertile way of creating clubs and various little groups of people to the benefit of all. If we lose that, that would certainly be a loss. So I think Carnoustie will continue to grow. I think it's very likely to pick up in the way of many elements of towns and cities across the country. Online shopping, technology, etc. will just mean a different form of life. I'd like to think in my heart of hearts that the clubs and societies will continue. I think it's important, and I think even on a nationwide basis, I'm sure governments would want to think that close-knit communities are the bedrock of activity, in a way giving people a balance of life. Apart from the formal education, there's a lot of informal, what you would call learning that is not unaware learning going on. I think there's another word that escapes me for the moment. But yes, it's part of the fabric to have a healthy social and recreational background. I think Carnoustie, from what I've known over the years, is probably quite better placed than most places, I think, to continue with a good, healthy recreational background. Unwitting learning was the phrase I was thinking about. There's a lot of unwitting learning going on where people participate in groups and clubs and societies. It adds to the fabric, it adds to the widening of knowledge. And, you know, Carnoustie, for its size, is a nice, safe town. We don't suffer any really serious problems here in Carnoustie. I think that, again, adds to the safety and the enjoyment of the town, which I think from my day in the 50s, 60s, I think I'd like to believe that that's still going to continue.
Well, Robbie, thank you so much for having joined us today to tell us about your new book. I certainly found it to be a fascinating account of how the town has changed and developed and flourished over the decades. And as you rightly say, it's a town that continues to have a very strong sense of community, and I'm sure much to look forward to in the future. So thanks again for having joined us to tell us more about it.
It's been a pleasure, Tom. Thank you very much for inviting me along to chat about that. Thank you. I look forward to meeting you again sometime to see how my book is faring.
My Life in Carnoustie, A Lang Time Ago by Robert Murray is available to buy now from all good independent retailers and online booksellers worldwide. Thanks very much for having joined us today. I hope that you'll tune in again soon.